This is the video number 2. Let's revise what we said in the previous one. We had an introduction, what SACE wants us to do for learning, what Pavlov discovered with his dogs, and how he has set up classical conditioning, all the key terms in classical conditioning, and we had the example in detail of the dog salivating every time the food was there initially as an unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, and eventually the dog, through a lot of pairing, was salivating, conditioned response, into after the bell sound, conditioned stimulus. And we finished our last lesson with this statement that classical conditioning has shown to be the most fundamental way we humans learn most of our new responses, emotions, fears, love, hate, and attitudes and behaviors in everyday life. So, this is the exercise we need to do. Is love classical conditioning? Is love a result of classical conditioning? Of course it is. All the love for your parents, or the love the parents have to their child, or to our beloved ones, whoever is that beloved one, is a result of classical conditioning. I want you to just remember that the special one, your life, is not special in the beginning. You have to get the pairing happening. You have to have that feeling happening when you see the person. The mother has to see the child and care for the child and start secreting oxytocin through breastfeeding to start bonding with the child. Let's discuss it. This is part of your first response of the module. I want you to find time to respond in few lines how love can be explained as classical conditioning. What I want you to do is what we need to do all the time. We have to find unconditioned stimulus. Me seeing my baby. Unconditional response. Nothing. And then how when I see my baby, conditioned stimulus, to have the feeling of love, feeling like kissing, conditioned response. Now, let's see examples of learning as part of classical conditioning. Let's start with my first example. I had a cat. My cat's name was Rara. Rara comes running and purring when I give her food. It's natural, she's hungry. Sometimes, because I couldn't find her, and I didn't want to open the tin and have the food lying on her dish, I began whispering the Greek to make her come out of her hiding spot. I don't know how they call that in Australia. I used the Greek. Even I'm in Australia. Even my cat was a pet, somebody else. Eventually I found that when I do this now, even without food in my hands, it's appearing, running, purring, thinking that there's food coming. I want you to identify each of the events in the scenario I described here in terms of unconditioned stimulus, unconditional response. If you want to put the neutral stimulus and the no response, you're welcome. But definitely I want conditional stimulus and conditional response. And put them down in the triangular or square classical condition diagram. I want you to post your response to the model form. In this lesson, we will discuss the second most important thing in classical conditioning, timing. And we're going to discuss two terms. The term of contiguity and another one that's not related to time, but very important as well, contingency. What is a contiguity? When we're talking about contiguity, we're talking about the time connection between the presentation of the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus. Coming back to the dogs, unconditioned stimulus was the food. I want you to remember that the food, unconditional stimulus, was presented simultaneously or very, very close with the conditioned stimulus, the bell, in order to make the association happening, in order to pair them. So this contiguity, the time lapsing between the presentation of the unconditional stimulus and the conditional stimulus, it has to be less than 0.5 of a second. It has to pick up almost simultaneously. And I want you to remember that the best idea is to have then conditional stimulus happening first. I want you to remember that the bell is ringing first and then the food is coming. The metronome was first and then the food. The light and then the food. So the light was indicative of the impetus of the food. And that's why the animal is salivating. Because by seeing the light, the bell or the music box thinks that the food is coming. The same way, I see the lightning and I know that the thunder will be heard soon. Now, what is contingency? Contingency means that the one is contagious to the other. The one is provoking the other. So, because it is very close in time, in the mind of the animal, be human or dog, the order in the presentation of the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus, which is called contingency, means that because the one is coming, I have to expect the other. And this is what we just said before. In order the contiguity to be successful, the time has to be very close, but contingency has to coincide as well. The conditional stimulus has to be happening before. The same thing, I need to feel the love for my child, to be making my brain swimming in oxytocin before I really make the connection and make that love with the face, connect that love with the face. Imagine that you love a person and you dreaming of this person coming. Don't you feel the warm thing in your tummy? Now, bring in your mind somebody you don't like. What's the feeling? But the feeling is there. Just remember that. We'll discuss it. Now, let's discuss it with details. First, stimulus contiguity. The time between presentation of conditional stimulus and unconditional stimulus. We just said before, stimuli are contiguous if they occur together in time and space. I need to bring the food 10 o'clock and the bell has to be ticking 0.5 of a second before 10 o'clock in Adelaide, in the same room. It doesn't work if I'm at Glenalga and the dog is pecking, basing. The more closely together contiguous the two stimuli are, then neutral stimulus and the unconditional stimulus, the more closely they occur, the more likely the association will be made. So it has to be instantaneous. And I'm bringing now the other issue, the contingency. During maximal conditioning, the conditional stimulus begins just before the unconditional stimulus and stops at the same time as the unconditional stimulus. I want you to remember the hormones. Okay, the dopamine we discussed in the beginning. The dopamine starts secreting to give us the motivation and stops at the same time we finish the hamburger. Theory states that, as we said, this should not be more than 0.5. Now, contiguity is teaching us how we are learning. I'm sorry. Meaning of the word contiguous means touching each other, being in contact, in close proximity. Actually touching, being near. I want you not to repeat the same things. You know that already. I want you to remember quicker conditioning and better conditioning occurs when the conditional stimulus occurs before the unconditional stimulus. I want you to tell me why. Think why. Now, why do you think that a better and quicker conditioning is happening when the conditional stimulus comes before? Okay, it is an additional factor. Okay, it is called contingency, but this is how the pairing works. I cannot make the pairing if the food comes before the bell. If the food comes before the bell, I'm salivating because of the food. The other factor we said is contingency. Contingency in classical conditioning means that predict that one stimulus will occur because the other one is present. It is conditional, it's depending on the occurrence. I want you to remember these words if they ask you this question. If they ask you contingency, the key words are is conditional, behavior or event is conditional, or depending on the occurrence. So I make a connection in my mind. If I work, I will be paid. But is this the case? Do I get paid every time I work? Have that in mind. Have that in mind. Because it is contingency, and I do get paid when I work, but it's not in classical conditioning. Okay? I want you to understand that in classical conditioning, contingency applies in all kinds of learning. Okay? And in other kinds of learning, not only classical conditioning. So, I want you to understand and remember that something is most likely to happen, but depends upon another thing happening first, and that's contingency. So I hear the bell and the food is coming. Can I hear the bell and the food not come? Yes. But most likely, when you hear the bell, you expect it to go to the class. When the dog hears the bell, has been trained to remember that food is coming after that. In both cases, we say that one event is contingent upon another. We said that, and just need to repeat it. Contingency and learning is depending on the fact that conditioned stimulus has to be presented before the behavior occurs. And the behavior is salivation, because I'm hungry. Behavior is to go to the class, because the bell has gone. Okay, that's learning. Let's see some examples. Let's watch some examples or discuss some examples. I know that this afternoon will rain. Why? Because I see the clouds. And in the morning, the clouds were light gray, but now they're becoming dark gray. So in the morning, I knew that the likelihood of rain was there. But now the contingency is supporting my belief that the rain is coming because the clouds are dark. I want you to understand in this example that the likelihood of rain is contingent upon the presence of the clouds. Have you ever seen rain without clouds? Have you seen clouds without rain? Yes. When? When they're white. Have you seen clouds, dark clouds without rain? Yes, you have. So we're talking about likelihood. Okay? Rain is contingent in the presence of the clouds. Most often. Let's see this example here. The flash of lightning usually is followed by the thunder. So, if you see lightning and you're scared of the sound, or you have been trained in listening to very, very, very loud sounds, you might put your hands over your ears or lean away to avoid the sound of the thunder. What are you doing actually is that you preparing yourself because you anticipate contingency is there. But if you're conditioned in being scared of thunderstorms, what would you do? Would you just put your hands to your ears? Or you will go under the bed? And I want you to think have 5 minutes, stop the video, have my 5 minutes, and tell me an example how a person can be classical conditioned to be scared of thunderstorms. We're going to discuss the class, or we're going to put it on the model as a response. Now, there is a theory in classical conditioning which is called contingency theory. What is that theory? If the classical condition, if the condition stimulus is paired with the unconditioned stimulus, and it happens all the time and consistently, then the unconditioned stimulus is conditional on the conditional stimulus. So, contingency theory means that you can predict this from this. You can't predict that Albert will be scared from seeing an animal. You can't predict that you will have a panic attack from seeing a spider. You can't predict that you will smile from seeing your beloved one. You can't predict that you will feel like vomiting when you have to go up high in a glass elevator, in a glass deck of the tower in Sydney, if you're afraid of it. Contingency theory was established by Pavlov. For Pavlov, the key variables is making association with the learning, but it is very important to have a number of times that the conditional stimulus was paired with the unconditional stimulus. It doesn't happen if it happens only one or twice. It has to happen consistently. Think this. Can you teach your dog to roll over? If you give him only once the order and the treat, how many times you need to teach your dog to do the same trick and treat them every time? Question: are all the dogs trained at the same time with the same number of orders? First thing, the pairings principle tells us this. As the number of pairings increases, the strength of the association between the between them stop. I'm repeating. As the number of pairing increases, the strength of the association between the conditional stimulus and the unconditional stimulus increases. So the more times, the more the strength, and the longer the association. The more times you practice in solving some maths, the more stronger is the association that if you work hard, you will get a good grade. Why is this happening? This was because the conditional stimulus became a reliable signal that the unconditional was going to occur. So if every time I study math, I have an A, I make the connection. If I want an A, I have to study. This is happening because the study is reliable signal that the A will occur. Now, remember when we discussed about the dogs? I asked you this. Are all the dogs learning the trick the same way? No. The same happened with the humans. The key elements affecting the classical condition is the individual's learning history. Some people are learning from the experience. Some people are not. So because you were sunburned, now you put sun cream all the time. But I'm not. That's why I have cancer. And you don't. So the individual learning history is important. You were burned, put sun cream. You have family members with cancer, you put sun cream. I don't. I have a different learning history. So that would be affected in my classical conditioning. Also, very important key element is the fact that some people are more prepared to learn than the others. Preparedness is depending sometimes on the age and the timing for the individual to be able to learn. I can't teach algebra to a primary year 1 child. I can teach them patterns, but not algebra as 5x equals 25. Now, key elements of classical conditioning really need to be discussed more. When we're talking about individuals' learning history, I want you to understand that prior learning can either hinder or make it better, our learning. So because I am scared of spiders, because I've bitten from spiders, my learning is hindered. I can't approach any insects. Now, what are we discussing? What we need to discuss about preparedness? Sometimes we have to know that the organism's biological readiness to learn and make certain associations is imperative. For example, the child, as we said, has to be ready to make the association 5x equals 100. Therefore, x equals 100 divided by 5, x equals 20. Also, some responses can be conditioning much more readily to certain stimuli than others. For example, I can teach you to avoid fire if you're burnt, and you're supposed to condition much more readily because it's survival. Also, for some humans, the biologically wired readiness to learn some associations more easily than others. What means biologically wired readiness? Someone is more gifted in mathematics. Biologically is wired to learn and make more associations related to mathematics than others who are not. The same with their fear. Some people biologically are wired to be ready to learn fear easier because they have secreted in the mother's womb a lot of cortisol, a lot of stress hormone. So their stress hormone is already elevated. So they learn to be scared and they are always stressed. It's very important to understand preparedness to learn, because this is what creates the major uh, factor that affects the phobias. We need to discuss this example. We say that phobias of spiders and snakes are more common than phobias of automobiles. So the preparedness of the human species to be scared of spiders and snakes is more common than to be scared of cars. Think this now. It is 10,000 times more likely to die in a car accident than to be bitten by a snake or a redback spider. Or not to die, it is much more possible, much more, the possibility is bigger to experience a car accident than a snake bite. Okay? So, if that's the case, why humans are scared of spiders, snakes, and not cars? Because as a species, we are prepared, we are biologically wired to be afraid of the spiders and the snakes, and we are not prepared to be scared of the consequences of the accident. We never think that if we have a car crash, we can be paralyzed. But because we're surviving in the nature for the past thousands and thousands of years, the survival in the nature means that we have to learn to avoid spiders and snakes, poisonous insects, plants, etc. So, as a species who is exposed to cars for the last 100 years and exposed to spiders and snakes for the last 10,000 years, we are scared, we're prepared to be scared, to have phobias, more of spiders. This is preparedness. This is an example of preparedness. So I want you to understand this thing, and I want you to remember the example of preparedness. Write down an example of preparedness. And I want you to make this connection before we stop for the next lesson. We discussed the key elements and the factors, individual learning history and also preparedness. Now we're going to discuss the principles of classical conditioning. And the principles are all related to stimuli. Okay? Stimuli. It doesn't say, but it's stimuli. So the principles of classical conditioning are related to stimulus discrimination, stimulus generalization, stimulus extinction, and stimulus recovery. What happens spontaneously? I want you to see the pairing. Discrimination and generalization are somehow linked together, whereas extinction and recovery, again, are linked together. And I want you to start thinking until our next video. Thank you.